Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new here. I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another true crime and makeup episode. I am covering a case today that you have really hammered me for. It's the case of Henry VIII, Vlad the Impaler, Elizabeth Bathory, the Salem Witch Trials. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new here. I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another true crime and makeup episode. Today I am bringing you a homicidal history. Today we are covering the reign of Henry VIII. Henry VIII was a wicked man, and he wrongfully executed a few of his wives. Whilst it's maybe not considered a true crime case, what happened was criminal and therefore it is true crime. And I know you guys love the older cases, so I really wanted to cover this. A big shout out to my mum. She was the one that put me onto this case and told me that I should get it done. So I did as I should. I've listened to my mum and I'm doing the case of Henry VIII today. If you enjoy true crime and you like makeup, make sure you are subscribed to my channel with the notification bell on, because I post every single Wednesday and Sunday at 7:30 British Standard Time. I am mixing up, historical cases with the newer cases, just trying to make sure there's something for everyone. But please do let me know if you enjoyed this video, or if you would prefer things that are a bit, bit later on. So Henry VIII, as king, he had a 38-year reign, and he is one of the most famous rulers of all time. Now, what makes him a famous ruler isn't so much his power or, what he accomplished as king. His fame comes from his 6 wives, and more specifically, the few wives that he beheaded. Henry, he lived by a certain mantra. Why get divorced when you can execute your wife? If you've got the power, use it. If you've got it, flaunt it. That was his motto. So if you were a wife of Henry VIII and he got tired of you and you didn't go quietly, this wasn't going to end well for you. So without any further rambling and any further ado, let's get into the historical case of Henry VIII and the execution of his own wives. Let me just go blow my nose and see if that helps with the situation. So Henry VIII, he was born on the 28th of June 1491 at Palace of Placentia in Kent. Now, he was the son of King Henry VII and also Elizabeth of York. Of Henry VIII's siblings, only 3 would actually survive past infancy. So that was Arthur, the Prince of Wales, and then Mary and Margaret Tudor. And then in 1493, at the age of 2, Henry VIII was appointed the Constable of Dover Castle and also the Lord Warden of the Cinque Ports. Just age 3, he was appointed the Earl Marshal of England and also the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. Soon after that, he was made the Knight of Bath. And then, if he's not already got enough titles and appointments, he was then created the Duke of York and then the Warden of the Scottish Marches. So a very young age, and he's achieving more goals than I ever could. And then in 1495, he was appointed Order of the Garter. And if, like me, you are feeling pretty bad about yourself right now because this child has achieved more in his 4 years than I have in my 26, I'm right there with you. But Henry VIII was a little bit of a nepo baby. His father was putting all of this in place. Now, his father wanted to maintain personal control of these lucrative positions. His father did not want to share them with any other established families, so the only way to offload these was to give them to Henry VIII, the child. Now, I think it's fair to say to all of us, we all know who Henry VIII is, and we know him as an important historical figure who's, quite famous. But Henry VIII was never supposed to be king, so there's not a whole lot known about his early years. But what we do know is that he was fluent in Latin, French, a little bit of Italian, like ooh la la. It's giving cultured king, And he also received a first-rate education, but apart from that and his many vast appointments that he had in his childhood, not much else is known because it wasn't really meant to be that important. Now, the main guy in all of this was meant to be Henry's brother, Arthur. Now, in November of 1501, Henry VIII had actually played quite a big role in the ceremonies surrounding the marriage of Arthur to Catherine of Aragon. Now, Catherine of Aragon was the youngest child of Ferdinand II of Aragon and also Queen Isabella I of Castile. Now, shockingly, in 1502, Arthur would pass away at the age of 15. This was just 20 weeks after his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Now, when Arthur had passed away, all of his duties and responsibilities was placed on Henry VIII, who was only 10 years old at this time and who had absolutely no experience in these areas because he wasn't meant to be that important. So in February of 1504, Henry VIII now becomes the new Prince of Wales, the Duke of Cornwall, and also the Earl of Chester. Yet again, I am being shown up by a literal child. At least I made my bed this morning. That counts for something. Now, as we were kind of saying, like Henry VII, he gave Henry VIII very, very few responsibilities, even after Arthur's death, and he basically shielded Henry VIII from the public, right? I don't know if he just didn't want him to be seen, or if he was trying to protect him, I'm not sure. But this meant that when King Henry VIII ascended the throne, he was very much untrained in the exacting art of kingship. Now, no disrespect whatsoever to Arthur, but him passing away, it's really put a crimp in Henry VII's plans, right? He had big plans between England and Spain. Arthur passing away kind of ruined it for him. So, what he decides to do, because he wants to keep a strong alliance between England and Spain, he offers up Henry VIII to be Catherine's husband, Catherine of Aragon. You know, Arthur's ex-wife, his brother's ex-wife, her. Now, both Henry VII and Queen Isabella, they were very, very keen on this idea. And this idea was actually discussed pretty much right after Arthur died. Yeah, like they grieved for a hot sec and then it was like, right, so, you know, who's going to marry Catherine now because I want you in the family. So then on the 23rd of June 1503, a treaty was signed for the marriage, and Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, they would be engaged 2 days later. Or well, wait, back in this day, I should say betrothed. They got betrothed, or they were betrothed 2 days later. Now, when I was researching all of this, it took me a while to make sense of it all. So hopefully the way that I've simplified it in this video should make sense. And if it doesn't, then sue me, right? I'm not a historian. But if both Catherine of Aragon and also her duenna, which is basically a chauffeur for unmarried girls, and it usually tends to be a married woman who's older, like their mother. So if they were telling the truth that Arthur and Catherine hadn't consummated the marriage, then a papal dispensation would only be required for the sake of public honesty. This is a reserved right of the Pope, which basically allows a couple to be exempted from specific canon law, and a matrimonial dispensation can be acquired to either allow a marriage in the first place or to dissolve one. Now, despite this, Henry VII and also the Spanish ambassador, they set out to obtain a dispensation for affinity. Now, affinity is an impediment to marriage of a couple and is a relationship which arises from a marriage even if not consummated, and this exists between the woman and a blood relative of the man, or, you know, vice versa. Now, because of Henry's young age at this point, they wouldn't yet marry, but it's coming. So then in April of 1509, Henry VII, he died. So 17-year-old Henry VIII succeeded him as king, and then on the 11th of June 1509, he married Catherine of Aragon. Now, it is said that apparently Henry VIII, at the beginning of his marriages, he was a good husband. He would dote on his wives, he was quite proud to show them off, he looked after them, he expressed love for them, but he would always wind up wanting more. And usually this would be mistresses. Now, these wives that he apparently loved so much, he really wound up having no respect for them whatsoever. And if the history books are right, it's probably safe to assume that he cheated on every single one of them. Which is crazy because, like, again, if the history books are right, this man was not a looker. He is not a handsome man. He might be able to speak a bit of French, but that's not going to do nothing. Now, soon after the marriage, Catherine of Aragon, she would become pregnant with a baby girl. However, devastatingly, this baby girl would be stillborn, and she wound up becoming pregnant again in 1510 with their son, Henry, Duke of Cornwall, but sadly in 1511 he would die just 2 months after he was born. And then in 1513, Catherine would give birth to another baby boy who was sadly stillborn. And then in 1515, she would give birth to another baby boy who would die just within hours. Now, in 1516, when Catherine was 30 years old, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl called Mary. Now, Catherine is said to have stated, "We are both young. If it was a daughter this time, by the grace of God, the sons will follow." Now, of course, this was really important to Henry VIII because he wanted a son who would basically take his place when he was gone. However, this would not be the case for the couple. They would not go on to have a son together. And I honestly think Henry started to resent Catherine for this. Listen, as I said earlier, it is stated by historians that Henry did love his wives. He, especially with Catherine of Aragon, he really professed his love for her to loads of different people, not just her. He made it known that he loved her. However, apparently, concerns were starting to grow that he was not going to get the son that he needed, and he felt like he might need to look elsewhere. Now, Henry VIII, he took many mistresses throughout his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. You know, that woman he loved so much so that he took several mistresses. You know, her. So he ended up having a mistress by the name of Elizabeth Blount, and she actually had his son, Henry Fitzroy. And then he had another affair with Mary Boleyn, and then later her younger sister, Anne Boleyn, who, if you know history, Anne Boleyn is a very, very well-known famous name, and what happens to her is just a tragedy. Now, unlike her sister Mary, Anne Boleyn, she straight up refused to be Henry VIII's mistress. You know, she was like, if you want to bed me, you'll marry me. If you really love and care about me the way that you're professing, then we'll marry, and then we'll go to bed. Now, Henry VIII, he very, very quickly fell in love with Anne Boleyn, and he desperately wanted to marry her. However, there's a problem, and that problem is Catherine. So Henry VIII at this point, right, he's getting desperate. He wants to marry Anne Boleyn and he needs Catherine out the picture. So he goes to the Pope and he begs and begs and begs for an annulment. Now, Thomas More, at the time, he refused to grant an annulment. However, Henry VIII had said that surely his marriage to Catherine is invalid because she had a previous marriage with his brother Arthur. Again, the Pope refuses to grant an annulment. So Henry VIII, he starts his own church, the Church of England. Now, to me, this is reaching, this is desperation at its finest, but okay. So Henry VIII, when he's being refused by the Pope and, you know, starting to feel like there's no way out, getting a wee bit claustrophobic here, he goes to Thomas Cromwell, who was a lawyer and his loyal chief minister. And Thomas Cromwell, he must get really, really tired of Henry's whinging and whining and his desperation for the annulment, because on the 23rd of May 1533 he had ruled the marriage to Catherine null and void. At this point, Catherine's 45 and Henry is 40. So now, on the 28th of May 1533, yeah, that's right, Henry moves quick, right? But on that date, he gets married to Anne Boleyn. However, he could not help himself previously. He had been so desperate to be married to Anne Boleyn that they had got married in secret. Now, what I found really sad was the fact that Henry VIII, he had sent Catherine of Aragon away, and when she was 50 years old, she had died in isolation, and she hadn't even seen her daughter before her death, or Henry. At the time, there were rumours that Catherine of Aragon might have been poisoned, and the poisoning had killed her. I'm no pointing any fingers, but if that were the case, I'm going to look at Henry, okay? So Anne Boleyn, she was known to have dark hair, beautiful features, and also a very lively manner. And it was said that even before they were married, Henry VIII would write love letters to Anne Boleyn. and some of these got a wee bit racy. Now, some of the letters that he had written had actually provided evidence that they might have been intimate before the marriage, because he referred to her pretty duckies. Do you know what this means? Her boobs. Pretty duckies, her boobs. What? What? Pretty ducky? Don't get me started. So Anne Boleyn, she was crowned the Queen Consort of England on June the 1st, 1533. Then, in early 1536, Anne Boleyn walked in on Jane Seymour, one of her lady's maids, sitting on Henry's lap. One of her own maids sitting on Henry's lap. Henry could not keep it in his pants. Now, devastatingly, soon after this, Anne Boleyn would give birth to a stillborn son, probably caused by stress. Now, Henry VIII, he actually seen this as punishment for his sins, yet he blamed Anne Boleyn and also turned against Anne Boleyn, despite his sins. Make it make sense. It doesn't. So, at this point, Henry is completely turned against Anne Boleyn, and just like with Catherine, he needs a plan to get rid of her. So he goes to his little minion, Thomas Cromwell, the one who helped him get an annulment from Catherine of Aragon so he could marry Anne Boleyn. That one, he now wants his help to get rid of Anne Boleyn. So Thomas Cromwell, his plan was to make out and lie and say that the stillborn child that Anne Boleyn had given birth to was the result of an adulterous affair. So both Thomas Cromwell and Henry VIII, they go to extreme lengths to round up 5 men that they accuse Anne Boleyn of having illicit affairs with. One of these men included her own brother, George Boleyn. So then on May the 2nd of 1536, Anne Boleyn was arrested by the king's men for treason, adultery and incest. Now, the disgraced queen, she had to enter the Tower of London through the Traitor's Gate, which, big statement back then. Now, within Anne Boleyn's trial, she was charged with conspiracy to murder the king, the poisoning of Catherine of Aragon, yeah, somehow it's come around to Anne Boleyn, and also, apparently she was conspiring to kill Mary Tudor, the king's first daughter, which is just, you know, I wasn't there, right? I was not there, but I don't believe it. Now, throughout Anne Boleyn's trial, there was also every salacious, sordid detail about these alleged affairs just being told to everyone, including this apparent affair that took place with her own brother. So it's probably no surprise to you, nor was it to me, that Anne Boleyn did not receive a fair trial. In my opinion, and the opinion of many others, Anne Boleyn's fate was sealed long before this trial even began, and it didn't help that some of our conspirators, those alleged men, they had actually confessed under torture. Yeah, so they were tortured until they confessed to these affairs that apparently never even happened. Guys, one of my cats are here to say hi. Say hi, buds. Say hi. I'm going to tell you about the history. No. Now, I could not quite believe when I read this. Well, actually, you know what? I could, because Henry VIII is just like this evil man. But he almost agreed to Anne Boleyn being burned at the stake. However, he wanted to show her some mercy. You know, this poor wife who he set up. So he allowed her to be beheaded, and it wouldn't be by axe, it would be by a swordsman. So then on May the 19th, 1536, Anne Boleyn had dressed in a crimson gown trimmed with royal ermine, and she walked to her execution. Now, it was said that Henry VIII had actually paid for a French executioner who was a swordsman, but other sources state that Anne Boleyn paid her own executioner, so I don't really know what to believe, right? But someone paid the executioner. That's all I know. Now, the swordsman, it would only take them one stroke to behead Anne Boleyn. She was the first woman who was crowned queen to be executed, and historians do believe that Anne Boleyn was innocent. Now, do you remember Jane Seymour, the woman who was sitting on Henry VIII's lap when Anne Boleyn walked in? Yeah, Henry VIII married Jane Seymour 11 days after Anne Boleyn's execution. He's trash. Jane Seymour, she was only 28 when she married Henry VIII. She was fair-haired and she was said to be very peaceful in nature, which people said was, you know, opposite to Anne Boleyn. I don't know why they keep comparing these women, right? But they do. Now, Jane and Henry, they would be married a little over a year when Jane would give birth to his son, the first male heir. Now, sadly, due to complications within the birth, Jane Seymour would pass away just 12 days after her son was born, which is just awful. Now, interestingly, Jane Seymour, she would be the only wife of Henry VIII to receive a queen's burial. Like, she was the only one that measured up. Now we're going to talk about Anne of Cleves. Now, Anne of Cleves was a German princess and she would be the fourth wife to Henry VIII, and this would be Henry VIII's shortest marriage. Now, despite being married to Henry VIII, Anne of Cleves actually had a pre-existing marital agreement in place with another English monarch. Now, because of this, Henry VIII sought grounds for annulment, which was granted, and luckily for Anne of Cleves, she agreed to this annulment and she went quietly. Now, because Anne of Cleves had agreed to go quietly and did indeed go quietly, she received a very generous annulment settlement, and she was allowed to reside in Hever Castle, which was the former residence of the Boleyn family. What a cheek, right? Now, Anne of Cleves, she would actually maintain a really nice relationship with King Henry VIII. Like, they remained good friends. She kept in contact with him and his children, and she actually went on to get the name the King's sister, which, like, you know, it's given incest, but we're in the 1500s, I guess it's okay. Now, I can only imagine that Anne of Cleves, had she not agreed to go quietly, I reckon she would have wound up with the same fate as Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, who we are going to go on to speak about. So Catherine Howard, she would be the fifth wife to Henry VIII. She would also be his youngest wife, being only 15 or 16 when they first got married. She would also be his second wife to be beheaded, and this is thought to be the most tragic death of them all, and I think it is to do with, you know, how young Catherine Howard was at this point and how terrified she was. Do you think there's any chance that we can just pretend that we don't all see Buddy climbing in the back? Or is that going to be too distracting? But put your bum away on camera. People don't want to see your wee bum. The part of Catherine Howard's story that just left me like, what? Is the fact that she was the first cousin of Anne Boleyn. So she's seen Anne Boleyn's fate, right? But she was also the second cousin of Jane Seymour. Crazy. And as I had said, she was either 15 or 16 when she got with Henry VIII, who at the time was 49 years old. Like, ugh. He's minging. Now, the marriage between Catherine Howard and Henry VIII, it would only last around a year, and they had absolutely no children together. On November the 1st, 1541, King Henry VIII was made aware of these alleged several affairs that Catherine Howard was having. One of these affairs was apparently with her distant cousin. Why are they always bringing the relatives into it? Like, leave the family out of it. So in November of 1541, Catherine Howard would be stripped of her title as queen and she would be arrested at Hampton Court. Now, Catherine is, being arrested by these guards and she is crying, she's terrified, and she breaks free from her guards and runs crying and screaming for Henry VIII down the long gallery. Now, she was screaming and crying for mercy. Henry was in the chapel. She was trying to run toward him for help, and she never made it to the door. The guards, they captured her again, and she wouldn't see Henry before her execution. And it just breaks my heart, the fact that she was running toward the very man who gave her a death sentence. Now, what I find just so sad as well is Catherine Howard, the night before she was executed, she spent the night praying, and she also practiced laying her head on the chopping block for her execution, which is just So disturbing and horrible. And then on the 13th of February 1542, Catherine Howard would be beheaded. Now apparently to this very day, her ghost haunts that long gallery, and people have claimed to see her running, screaming, terrified as she was that same day. It's almost like her spirit's caught in this loop of repeating that horrible day of her life. And it's just crazy. I mean, people say that they hear her scream, they hear her cry, they hear her call out for Henry. Like, it is insane. You should totally look it up. Like, I was engrossed in this for hours. Now, not only was Catherine Howard beheaded, one of her supposed lovers, Thomas Culpeper, he was also beheaded as well. However, another man by the name of Francis Derham, he had the most grisliest fate of them all. He was hung, drawn, and quartered for his crimes, you know, his affair with Catherine that maybe didn't even happen. Now, it was only Henry Mannix, who had been Catherine's music teacher, who would escape with his life. But Henry is not innocent. Not in my books and not in the history books. Henry apparently groomed Catherine from a very young age, as early as the age of 13. So she was a victim of his. Now, Francis Derham, he did admit to having like a premarital affair with Catherine, so he had had sex with Catherine, but nothing post-marriage to Henry. Like, there was no affair there, it was just prior to the marriage they had a thing. But Henry was just ticked off that Catherine Howard was not a virgin when he married her. He wanted to deflower her because he's a weirdo. And also, what's very interesting is apparently Thomas Culpeper, you know, the one who has, you know, been beheaded, but apparently he was like quite a well-known sexual predator and he would rape women constantly, but he never faced any consequences for this because he had very close ties with the king. So, King Henry VIII, what you're telling us here is that if it's other women being raped, that's okay. If, however, one of your wives have an affair with the said rapist, then you want to kill the rapist, but not when he's raping other innocent women. Right. Okay. Now, Henry VIII's sixth and final wife would be Catherine Parr, and she is thought to be the most influential wife that he had, and she was the one that ensured that his lineage continued. She became a restorer of his court, she united his family and made sure that they were like a close-knit family. Like, she seemed like a decent enough person. Now, she was instrumental in his children's education, and she also passed legislation that meant that illegitimate children through either divorce or annulment were legitimate again. Now, Henry VIII, he would die at the age of 55, and Catherine Parr was allowed to keep her gown, her jewels, and she was allowed to reside in one of the castles. Now, obviously, Catherine Parr is famous because she was one of Henry VIII's 6 wives, but she made her own history as well by being the most married queen in England. Pretty cool. I'm sure we can all agree, right, that there is at least one person in the world who has a lot of power that we wish didn't have a lot of power because they don't really use it for good. I think that's fair to say, and I think it's fair to say that we have and have had previously loads of people in power who abused their position of power and done really bad things, and that is very similar to the case today. So Vlad III, he was born between 1428 and 1431, and at the time he was born was when there was a great feeling of unrest through Wallachia. Now, Vlad's mother, the Queen, came from a royal Moldavian family, and his father was Vlad II Dracula. This sounds quite good, actually. Now, the surname Dracula actually translates to dragon. Now, this surname was given to Vlad II after he got involved in a Christian crusading order, and the order was known as the Order of the Dragon. Kind of sounds like a really good Harry Potter film, if you ask me. the Order of the Dragon. And Vlad Jr., he had two brothers, one called Mircea and another called Radu. Now, Dracula's sort of territory was a site of constant unrest and turmoil. It was really just an awful place to be. Now, this was due to Wallachhia's proximity to the Christian-ruled Europe and also the Muslim-ruled Ottoman. Now, in 1442, the Ottomans called for like a diplomatic meeting, and so they invited Vlad Dracul. Now, Vlad Dracul thought, do you know what? This would be a great learning experience for the boys, so I'm going to bring them along as well. So he wound up bringing along Vlad III and also Radu, thinking, you know, good educational experience for them both. Now, whilst Vlad and his children were just in it for the great educational experience that they thought they would have, they were captured by the Ottomans and held hostage. Now, the Ottomans said to Vlad Sr., "We will let you go, but," and this is a big but your sons, you have to leave them here." Now, Vlad's thinking for 5 seconds, and he's like, "So I can go, but I need to leave my sons. I'm gonna go, yeah. Boys, I'm just gonna take off." Now listen, it is said that Vlad Sr. had taken off because he believed that would be the option safest for his family, but low-key, think he was trying to save his own ass just a little bit. Would any parents leave their children? I'm not sure. Now, credit where it's due, the princes Vlad III and Radu, they had not too much of a bad time whilst they were hostages. They learned about philosophy, they learned about science, they learned about the art of war. The circumstances weren't all too shabby. However, we could not say the same for Vlad Sr., Vlad II. So, as I was saying, back home, it is all kicking off. It's all kicking off now. Everything was up in the air. Everything was going wild. Now, local warlords known as the Boyar, they overthrew Dracul in 1447. Now, he was killed in the swamps behind their home. Now, his oldest son, he was tortured, blinded, and buried alive. Yeah, Vlad III and Radu's situation's looking very good right now. Now, Vlad III, he was freed pretty soon after the death of his family, and after this time, he started going by the name Vlad Dracula. Now, this meant son of the dragon. That is a vengeful name if ever I've heard it. This is a man out for revenge. Now, when Vlad III returned to Wallachia, he became the most violent, cruel, and disgusting ruler of all time. This would go on to give him the name Vlad the Impaler. I should have been in Killing Eve with Jodie Comer because that Russian accent is kind of popping off, right? But yeah, Vlad the Impaler was his name. And I'm going to tell you why very, very soon. That is quite a good wing, and it's very sad to know that this side will never match. So, 1448, Vlad III returns to Wallachia, and he is going to take the throne back from Vladislav II. Stick with me, there's There is a lot of Vladislav, bear with. So Vladislav II, he was a guy that was put into the throne after Vlad Dracul's death, after he had been, murdered. Now, because Vlad Dracul's son had came back, the throne was then handed back over to him. However, before Vlad III can even get his ass imprint in the chair and use the armrests, Vladislav comes back and he decides, actually, I want that throne again. So he takes it back. So Vladislav, he's back in the throne, back in the comfy chair, and he's loving life. However, Vlad III, he's not too happy with his position in the economy, and he decides in 1456 to come back and take the throne back for a second time. Now, he brings a supportive group of Hungarians who help him get the throne back. So Vladislav is like, you know what, fair enough, you take it. I mean, with these guys, it was honestly like musical chairs. Like, just someone take the chair and be done, okay? It's too much. Now listen, apparently Vlad the Third, he wasn't entirely convinced that Vladislav wouldn't come back to try and take the throne again, so he decided to behead him on the battlefield. I guess to like send a message, but also low-key to make sure like he definitely can't come back for the throne. And once he knew that Vladislav was out the way and, you know, gone completely, he would unleash his insane reign of terror. So soon after Vlad was back on the throne, he was like, do you know what? In Wallachia, I have some of my own enemies that I really need to deal with. Now, the people of Wallachia, they were bad-mouthing Vlad the Third. They were saying that, you know, his dad was a far better ruler. He cannot keep this country under control. Bring back Vlad II. Now, Vlad was absolutely raging when he heard this news because, like, he's like, I'm trying my best, people. There is only so much I can do. And he believed that he was a really good ruler. But when he heard that the people of Wallachia was saying that he didn't measure up, well, that really steamed Vlad's clams. He did not like this one bit. So Vlad's thinking to himself, you know, I really need to assert my dominance here. Like, people need to know I'm the big daddy around here now, okay? No Vlad II, so you can forget about him. I'm the daddy. Now, in order to do this, Vlad thought, why not host a fantastic banquet? You know, like hashtag come dine with me. And at this banquet, Vlad III decided to invite his opposition. Drama. So the guests arrive to this fabulous banquet, you know, very eloquent, but these festivities wouldn't remain very festive for long. At least not for the guests. Not too long after the guests arrived, Vlad III began stabbing his guests to death. He then went on to impale them on spikes surrounding the banquet table, and once they were impaled, a lot of these bodies continued twitching. Yes. Now, if that's not grisly enough, Vlad sat at his banquet table, he took a bit of bread, and he was using the impaled twitching guests as like a dipping sauce. So he was dipping the bread into their blood and eating it. I can see now why this guy inspired Dracula. Like, I don't know why he's feeling the need to decorate with twitching bodies. Like, what happened to just like the good old-fashioned candlesticks, you know? Much better, much cleaner, just much nicer. So after this whole like slaughtering of the people at the banquet, Vlad's reputation as an extremely violent man just continued to grow, obviously. And Vlad would continue to defend his kingdom by doing the most grisliest things possible. He really lived up to his reputation. Now, just call me Curious George, right? But this whole thing was just crazy to me. So I had to Google further, you know, what exactly took place at the banquet, you know, what went down. And I came over the method of which Vlad would use to impale his guests. And what the hell did I read? Well, I'm about to tell you too. So as you're probably already aware from what I've said, impalement was Vlad's chosen method of murder. Very innovative, we don't hear that much. But what he would do when he was going to impale anyone, he would take either a wooden or a metal pole, and a lot of the time he would make sure the edges were rounded, so when he was impaling the people, it wouldn't tear through any internal or vital organs, so they would be alive for hours, if not days, impaled on this pole, right? Now, if that doesn't make your toes curl or your legs cross, this next bit certainly will. So Vlad the Impaler, he would take these poles, and the area of insertion for these poles was either the vagina or the rectum. And he would put this all the way up through their bodies until it either came out of their mouth, their neck, or their shoulders. Like, no. See, for me as well, it's even just the fact that he thought about rounding the edges so it didn't puncture any internal or vital organs, just to prolong their pain and suffering. Like, how sick and twisted can one man be? Now, because Vlad wanted to state his dominance, he did not care who witnessed these impalings, and in fact, he made it a public spectacle. You could watch the impalings, like a live action horror film. You could watch if you wanted to, you could watch over the next couple of days, or you could come and see the impaled people. Yeah, very sick and twisted was Vlad. In one case, Vlad III had actually impaled Saxon merchants in Kronstadt. Now, the reason for this was that they had once been allies with the Boyars. Do we remember the Boyars? They're the ones who killed Vlad's family. Vlad was very much, you know, eye for an eye at this point. He wanted to get the people who took his family away from him. Now, Vlad the Impaler, he would use this method of torture to punish anyone who displeased, misbehaved, or threatened and questioned him. However, this would not be the only method of torture that Vlad the Impaler would use. Now, at one point, Vlad, he had the turbans of the Ottoman diplomats nailed to their head because they had refused to remove them for religious reasons. And he was like, if you're not going to remove them for me, you're never getting to remove them. Nailed to their skulls. What? Now, Sultan Mehmed II, he was another man who was known for his own atrocities, and even he was shocked at Vlad's appetite for destruction, torture, violence, and murder. Like, this shocked him. A man who done his own stuff that was not nice. He was shocked by Vlad. Now, I think what probably really shocked Sultan was the fact that he had witnessed 23,000 corpses of his own men impaled on stakes, and this ran for around 60 miles. 60 miles, 23,000 corpses impaled on stakes. And like, these were lined up all around the capital of Tagavista. Like, it is crazy. And Sultan would see these bodies around the capital of Tagavista because he was going to invade Wallachia in 1462, and I think maybe this just, you know, gave him something to think about. Now, Sultan Mehmed II, he did say that anyone who would go to such extreme lengths to protect and defend their kingdom deserves to keep it. And because of this, the Ottoman forces, they retreated the next day. And I feel like I can just picture Sultan Mehmed walking up and seeing all these corpses and going to Vlad and being like, why are we fighting? You know, why are we fighting? I know he wasn't American, but the quote that I just done is an American quote, so sorry. But yeah, I can just imagine him walking up and doing a very swift U-way and taking off. Now, it is stated that Vlad the Impaler had killed around 60,000 people, and around 25,000 of which was people that had been impaled. And every time he was impaling these people, he was getting his bread and, you know, dipping it in. I don't know if he was pretending that the blood was tomato ketchup, or maybe he just enjoyed it. Now, Vlad III's bloody reign of terror would come to an end in 1462 after he was imprisoned by Hungarian forces. So the Ottomans, they had launched a campaign that they hope would see Vlad's more mild-tempered, less spiky and paley brother Radu on the throne. Now, obviously, Vlad did not want this to happen. He was enjoying his time on the throne. He was just running things the way he wanted to run them. So he wanted to stop this from happening. So he seeks help from the Hungarians, the ones who imprisoned him. So Vlad goes to the Hungarians, basically calling in reinforcements, calling for backup. And when he arrives, the Hungarians immediately imprison him. Now, the reason that they did this was because they didn't want a war to start between themselves and the Ottomans. So the best thing they could do is imprison Vlad and make it look like they're also against him the way the Ottomans are. Now, there isn't a great deal of information out there about Vlad's imprisonment, but we do know that he was released in 1476. So, I mean, at least he was released. Actually, no, because I don't want him to be released. But he was released. And when he was released, he went on to marry Justina Szilagyi. Now, she was a relative of Matthias Corvinus, the Hungarian king. The Hungarians imprisoned him. He's marrying a relative of the Hungarian king. However, this Hungarian king had actually made a deal with Vlad. He said to Vlad that he will restore him in the throne once Radu is dethroned. So they had something going on. However, before Vlad III could get back on the throne, he would die in battle alongside the Hungarians, who were now at war with the Ottomans, later that same year. Now, the Hungarians, they had obviously turned their back on Vlad before because they didn't want to cause a stir between themselves and the Ottomans, and then the Hungarians and Ottomans end up being at war anyway, later on. Make it make sense. Now, allegedly, Vlad the Impaler would go on to suffer the same fate as his old rival, Vladislav II. Now, Vlad the Impaler, he was beheaded in the battlefield, and his head was paraded on the way back to Constantinople to the public. His head was then placed in the hands of his worst enemy, Sultan Mehmed II. Now, Sultan Mehmed II, his plans were to display his head across the city gates. Was it a warning, or was it just perfect revenge? I don't know. Let the record show that I am wearing a top. Also, just whilst I clean one of my dirty brushes from my previous video, I just need to address this. Vlad the Impaler, if you've not seen that video, I'll put it up here or up here. But Vlad the Impaler and Elizabeth Bathory, they would have been a perfect match in the worst way. But they would have been a perfect match. And I think, their passions, they really would have flourished with each other in the worst way possible. But I can't help but think they would have been quite a couple in history. Do you ever look at your face and you're like, something doesn't look right? But I think it's just my face. What's wrong with it? So Elizabeth Bathory, she was born on August the 7th of 1560 in near Bator, Hungary. We're in Hungary today, and as we know, my pronunciation of places that are not in Scotland is pretty poor. So I have Googled and went on this pronunciation website. I think it's Let's Pronounce or something like that. And I have phonetically spelled out how to pronounce it, but I think I'm still going to say it wrong. But it is the thought that counts, and I am trying. Now, Elizabeth Bathory, let me tell you something. This girl, she knew privilege. Her and privilege went hand in hand. She had a mass amount of wealth. Her family were very prominent social figures. She had a very, very high social ranking. And also, she spent her childhood in Iched Castle. And Elizabeth's father, he was Baron George Bathory VI, and he came from the Iched branch of the family, and he was a brother of Andrew Bonaventura Bathory, who was a voivode, and he had been the voivode of Transylvania. This is the highest ranking official, and they're basically picked out by the monarchs. And then Elizabeth's mother, Baroness Anna Bathory. Now, she was the daughter of Stephen Bathory of Somleo. If you haven't noticed, Anna and George, they're keeping it in the family, if you know what I mean. Incestual. And although with great status comes great stress, it also comes great wealth, great respect, fear. Now, Elizabeth Bathory, she had multiple siblings, and her older brother Stephen, he had actually served as a Judge Royal of Hungary. As a young girl, Elizabeth, she learned multiple languages. She learned Latin, German, Hungarian, Greek, and she was said to be fluent in all four. We love a cultured queen. I could never. I had an app on my phone to learn Spanish, and I learned it for one night, learned how to order a tequila shot, and that was it. It was said that even though she grew up in a very privileged, wealthy environment, she also faced a lot of cruelty. In her, I was going to say her family home, but in her family castle. But anyway, apparently this cruelty that she faced would be a catalyst for the cruelty that she would go on to portray later in life, which I don't like excuses. Okay, so I sympathise for the cruelty she faced, but I'm not going to excuse her actions. And not only was Elizabeth Bathory a victim of, violence and abuse and brutality at a young age, she also witnessed it from a young age being dished out to the servants of the castle, the household. But she would witness the brutal beatings of many servants. This is something she grew up around, and at the age of 6 years old, she even witnessed an execution. That's gonna f*** you up, you know what I mean? That is not an easy thing to come back from. Like, no human being should be witnessing that, but no 6-year-old should be witnessing that. Now, as a young child, Elizabeth Bathory, she would suffer from multiple seizures, which was thought to have been epilepsy now, but back then, any symptoms that related to epilepsy today, that was diagnosed as falling sickness. There's no treatment for epilepsy back then, and when you have falling sickness, there were a few treatments, methods that you could try to recover, and in my opinion, they are a wee bit outlandish, but this is what they did. They would take the blood of a non-sufferer, so a non-epileptic. They would take their blood and smear it on the lips of the person having the seizures. In this case, Elizabeth Bathory. She was having, blood smeared all over her face. Now, the second option was to give the epileptic or the victim of fallen sickness, to give them a mix of the blood of a non-sufferer and also a piece of skull as their episode ended. Listen, I don't know whose skull it is, right? I don't know if it's the person who's also given the blood, but like how they get in that. Is it the skull of a dead person? Is it the skull of an animal? Whose skull is it? I don't know, but it was a skull in blood, mixed and given. Now, it is said that Elizabeth Bathory, apparently when she was 13 years old, she gave birth, that's right, this little girl is having a baby, but apparently she gave birth to a child, which I was like, oh my god, this is horrific, because obviously this little girl has been raped. That was not the part that annoyed or shocked anyone. People were annoyed and shocked by Elizabeth because she had given birth to a peasant baby. It's not the fact that it's like underage sex or rape, it's the fact that the baby was the baby of a peasant boy. That was not going to fly here. Now, of course, at this minuscule age of 13, Elizabeth Bathory is not married, okay, so this child is out of wedlock, which was heavily frowned upon. So her mum's panicking and she's thinking, oh my god, my 13-year-old daughter who has given birth to a peasant baby, this is not going to go down well, so let's sell the child. They had given the baby away to a local woman who was well trusted by the Bathorys, like out of sight, out of mind, never happened. And then this child was taken off to Wallachia. I wonder if she knew Vlad the Impaler. I will say that the subject of the baby did come up long after Elizabeth Bathory's death, and apparently it was like the peasant people spreading the rumour. So like some people say it's not true, some people say it is, but most people say that the peasant people, they were spreading gossip. They were spreading vicious lies. I'm sorry, if you think gossip in this day and age is bad, take us back centuries, because the gossiping back then was even worse and even juicier. So in 1573, just 13 years old, right, a lot is popping off at the age of 13 for Elizabeth Bathory, but she would get engaged to a man. She would get engaged to Count Frank Nadasdy. A count. This is how she becomes the Countess. Now, Frank, he was part of the Nadasdy family, which was this huge aristocratic family that had roots that reached all the way back to the Middle Age. So they are a big deal. Now, the couple, they would get married 2 years later when Elizabeth Bathory was just 15 years old, and this marriage was not so much a marriage as it was a political arrangement within the aristocratic circle. Like, they only wanted their children to marry the best of the best. So like, if you've ever met like a mother-in-law that doesn't like you or a father-in-law that doesn't like you now, it was even worse back then. Now, Nadasdy, he was the son of a Hungarian nobleman who was known to be a great landowner and statesman. So getting back to their big special day, on May the 8th of 1575, Bathory and Nada's Day, they would get married at the Palace of Verona. Now this marriage resulted in combined ownership of both Transylvania and the Kingdom of Hungary. So like, everyone's a winner. Now, as is tradition until this very day, it's quite normal for a groom to give his wife a gift on their wedding day. So, you know, Frank, he's thinking, what can I get Elizabeth to show her just how much I love her and appreciate her? Do you want to know what he got her? Drum roll, please. A castle. He gave her a castle as her wedding gift. And this castle was Castle Cheddar. Listen, between Bathory and also Nada's Day, there's castles galore, right? So they have plenty of options. So Elizabeth's like, I want to keep my castle nice and clean and just like for me. So they decide that they're going to live at Nada's Day's castle at Charvar. Why just have one castle when you can have two? Like have one each, obviously. Now, apparently, the Nada's Day castle... the atrocities were popping off in there. It's actually said that Frank Nazadeh, he was the one who introduced Elizabeth Bathory to the art of torture. Torturing, it's an art. Has to be learned. It is actually said that at some point in Nada's Day, he had a young girl restrained and like covered her in honey, like she was dripping in honey, which by the way is like my dad's worst fear. Like people are scared of spiders and stuff. His biggest fear is getting like honey poured down his neck and then being forced to do this and it like all sticking. Anyway, I digress. This girl, yes, she was covered in honey and then they set insects on her to feast on her bare flesh. What? And apparently this was all for the pleasure of Elizabeth. Now, as we know with Nada's Day, he loves to give an extravagant gift, right? So the wedding present was a castle, and he's like, how am I going to top that for a woman like Elizabeth? Like, how can I really get her something that she wants? He gets her the perfect gift. Well, perfect for Elizabeth. I wouldn't be too happy, but each to their own. But he gets Elizabeth gloves that's like spiked with claws, and the reason for this is so she could thrash her servants whenever they made a mistake. Now, it wasn't just Nada's Day that was involved in this corruption with Elizabeth. Her Aunt Clara, you bad woman Clara, she was also heavily involved and she introduced Elizabeth to orgies in a circle of people that were sorcerers, witches and alchemists. Which, by the way, if you ever visit Scotland, go to the Alchemist Bar in Glasgow. It's really nice, you'll like it, great cocktails. So, in 1578, Nada's Day, he becomes the commander of the Hungarian troops and he would lead them to war against the Ottomans. And whilst he was leading these troops to war, Elizabeth, she was gonna, maintain business, BAU, and she was also looking after the multiple estates that were owned by the family. So although she was obviously having to manage business as well, in particular, the main thing was protecting the estates of her husband. Now, these estates, they lay sort of like on the route to Vienna and they were at a very high risk of attack. Now, the reason for this is because the village of Cheddar, that had already been attacked by the Ottomans and Charvar was in even more danger. But also, like, low-key, what's he expecting one woman to do? Like, is she going to stand outside and be like, oh, sorry, you can't attack here. I'm on watch. No. Like, come on. Now, during this time, Elizabeth, she would also be responsible for the Hungarian and Slovakian people. And at first, it's all going well. She seems to be a natural born leader and she really has a knack for governing the local population. But she's not really. Because again, like I said, these people back then, they loved to gossip. So it wouldn't be long before Elizabeth Bathory was being accused of abusing, torturing and beating her servants and the people that she was supposed to be looking after. Even though this was quite well known, throughout the town, no one really looked at her because at the end of the day, she's kind of meant to be looking after us now and I don't really want to get on her wrong side. In 1585, Anna Nada's Day would be born to Nada's Day and Bathory and this would be their firstborn child. However, they would go on to have more children. I believe it was 4 that they had in total, so another 3 after Anna. All of these children, they would be appointed private tutors, which back then was known as governesses. You know, that word that I'm trying to say. This was basically like a live-in nanny, apart from they were more there for teaching and helping the children learn. They weren't really much of the caring types, but Elizabeth wanted this for her children because that's what she had grown up. On January the 4th of 1604, Ferenc Nadezhdy, he would pass away at just the age of 48, and he would pass away due to an unknown illness. Now, this illness had started around 1601, and by 1603 he was left completely disabled. It had all started with like a pain in his legs and progressively just got worse, rendered him disabled, and then ultimately killed him. And so after 29 years of marriage, I guess Nadezhdy is wanting to make sure that Elizabeth and his children, or as he referred to him, his heirs, he never really had much, you know, paternal instinct, his heirs, he wanted them looked after, so he entrusted them into Georgi Thurzo, and I am saying his name so bloody wrong. Is it like Georgi? I was going to say Georgi, but I doubt it. I don't know, maybe. And coincidentally, he was Bathory's cousin, but he will also be a very important name in this case, so remember it. So it is said with Elizabeth Bathory's murders, most of them would take place between 1590 and also 1610. Now, most of the murders would be committed after her husband's death. Now, at first, Elizabeth Bathory, she would target, you know, young girls who were of the poorer class. She would target them. Now, she had lured them to her castle under the promise that they would get some servant work. Other daughters had actually been sent to Bathory's castle by their parents in order to be taught by Bathory about courtly etiquette. And let's just bear in mind, there is a whole bunch of rumours going around about this woman killing and torturing people, and yet the parents are sending the children off? Absolutely not. Bathory, she tried to promote herself as a very humble and helpful figure to the community, okay? But the rumours, they were getting even further spread. Like, these were widespread news now. Everyone had an idea of what was going on behind those castle walls. And it even got to a point where women were trying to keep their daughters, like, locked away and hid away from Bathory. Not only would Bathory kill daughters of the gentry throughout her murderous escalations, but she was abducting local girls in the area. Now, she was abducting them because she was like, well, you know, no one wants to come to my castle anymore because of these rumours. And I wonder why, Elizabeth. So she just thought, you know, if no one's going to come on their own accord, I'm just going to go out and take them back myself. Bathory is said to be one of the most horrific and prolific serial killers in history, and she was known to be monstrous and sadistic in nature. Not only would she want to kill these young women, but she wanted to torture them in the most heinous ways possible. She was evil. So Elizabeth Bathory, she would have many methods of torture. I mean, in some instances, she would beat the girls within an inch of their life or to death with clubs. She would burn or mutilate their hands in some kind of way. Whatever one seemed to be getting the most pain from the girl, that's what she would do. She would often freeze or starve these girls to death as well. Like, she wonders why she has no visitors at the castle when these rumours are flying around like an empty tracksuit. Remember how we discussed the fact that her husband restrained the girl, lathered her in honey and then put insects on her to feast on her flesh? Elizabeth Bathory, she would continue this after her sicko husband's death. These young girls were literally being eaten alive by insects. It's so disturbing. Like, see, when you really think about it and you take a step back, if that truly happened to those young women, I cannot even imagine the pain and suffering involved in that. Another thing Elizabeth would do is she would take the victims and burn them with extremely hot tongs, and then as soon as she burned them, she would dip them in ice cold freezing water just to induce the most pain possible. She was even known for sewing her victims' lips together so they couldn't scream, they couldn't cry, they couldn't, you know, beg for help. And as it always seems to go in these cases, you know, when you think it can't get any worse, it just does. Elizabeth Bathory, she would take needles and stick these into her victims' lips or any other sensitive body parts. She was also known to bite, yes, bite out chunks of their breast, their face, their limbs, whatever she could sink her teeth into. But one of her absolute favourite methods of torture was to stab and mutilate her victim's face and body with scissors. Now these scissors, they were multi-purpose, like she did a lot with these. She was able to cut off their hands, their noses, their genitals with a pair of scissors. I don't know if they were crafting scissors, right? I wasn't there. I'm assuming they weren't. Like, how can you actually cut off a hand with a pair of scissors? I will never ever look at scissors the same ever again. I know, like, we've said a lot of disgusting stuff, but the thing that makes my toes curl and like, oh, my teeth feel funny is the fact that she would use the scissors to slice the skin in between her victim's fingers. She would slice that open. I can't. For me, that's right up there with like slicing the Achilles. Ugh. Now, the thing that makes Elizabeth Bathory so infamous was her vampiric tendencies. Yeah, she was a vampire undercover, I'm telling you. Listen, right? Elizabeth Bathory, she was someone who really valued her beauty. She wanted to remain young and beautiful forever. And like, don't we all? Like, I almost went into catatonic shock when I found my first grey hair, but you don't see me murdering people or bathing in their blood, but we'll get there. So it is said that Elizabeth Bathory, she would drink the blood of her young victims who were virgins because she believed that this would lead to eternal youth. We put on cream, she drinks blood. She is literally drinking from the fountain of youth. And if you think that drinking the victim's blood isn't bad enough, Elizabeth Bathory used to bathe in the blood of these young girls because she believed, yet again, that this would keep her young and beautiful forever. And like, it got me thinking, low key, did Elizabeth Bathory invent the vampire facial? Could it be? Listen, the Bathory claims just get wild, right? People were actually claiming that she was a real-life vampire, not just acting like one, she was a real-life vampire. And other people claim that they seen Elizabeth Bathory have sex with the devil himself. They witnessed it. She was going all in on the devil. Now, it is said at this point, Elizabeth Bathory has killed up to 650 victims. And the rumours, they are just flying about like tumbleweed in the Wild West. It is crazy. Things are getting so, insane out there that the king's called in. So we've got King Matthias II. He calls in Georgi Thurzo. Remember him? Elizabeth's cousin. So he is called in to investigate. So he hires like 2 notaries to gather witness statements. And at first they're able to get like 52 witness statements. And then it goes up to like 300 witness statements, all against Elizabeth Bathory. Now, it is said that some of these statements, they might have been tortured out of some people. Okay, I'm not going to say that it was all legal. And then on the 30th of December 1609, Thurzo, he went to the Cheddar Castle and he would arrest Bathory and 4 of her servants who were apparently accomplices to her murders. Now, apparently, whilst Thurzo was there, he had seen the dead body of a young woman who Bathory had killed, and then there was also another girl who was like hanging on for dear life. Some sources even claim that Elizabeth Bathory was caught in the act and that when Thurzo entered the castle, she was standing there covered in blood with the dead body. These are just, people saying stuff. And I will say that most sources do state that Elizabeth Bathory was actually having dinner at the time that she was arrested. So, believe what you want. The first one's more interesting, obviously, but it's probably been embellished. What I found absolutely crazy is that in 1611, the servants, they would be put on trial for the murders. 3 of these servants, they would be convicted of witchcraft and said to be executed / burnt at the stake for apparently partaking in these murders that Elizabeth Bathory was committing. Now, Elizabeth Bathory, she was spared the execution. They thought, do you know what, it's not in the best interest of the people that she be executed. Now, Thurzo, he had sort of like convinced King Matthias II that, if he executes a noble. This would damage the nobility, and the execution would also cause a public scandal as well, which they just did not want, because this trial, this scandal, that could really damage the reputation of an influential family in Transylvania. So what they did instead is Elizabeth Bathory, she was taken back to her castle, Castle Cheddar, and she was bricked into one single room. Like, they bricked her in. There was like nowhere she could go. I don't know how she got fed, because she actually survived there for 4 years before dying. Like, she would last in there for 4 years until 1614, when she would then pass away. But like, how were they getting her food? Like, there couldn't have been a window, because she might have escaped the window. Unless it was like bars. Unless they put like a prison door in this bricked up wall. I don't know, but it was basically like being in a prison cell, apart from it was a single room in the Cheddar Castle. Now, I have to say, it is actually thought by many that Elizabeth Bathory didn't actually commit any crimes. She didn't bathe in blood, she didn't kill her servants, she didn't kill innocent people. People believe that King Matthias II actually owed her and her husband a huge amount of debt. So like, what was the best way to get rid of debt back then? Brick them up in their own house. And it is also said that King Matthias II might actually have been the person to start the rumours about Elizabeth Bathory. But I don't know. Listen, I don't want people to suffer, but obviously the first story is more interesting than that one. Who knows? What do you think? I am so interested to know like your thoughts, feelings and opinions on this case of Elizabeth Bathory, because if it's true, how bloody insane is that? And like, her and Vlad the Impaler, match made in hell. They kind of would have been perfect for each other in the worst way possible. When I tell you, I almost came on camera with this wig on, because makeup wise I really wanted to channel Sarah Sanderson, because witches. But yeah, this is a very yellow wig, and honestly, blonde, not my friend, especially this blonde. I just thought, give you a wee laugh. Screenshot if you want. Come, little children. So let me tell you, before we get into this case, right, what I realised is during the Salem Witch Trials, I would not have lasted a hot second as a teenager. I was absolutely feral. My mood swings, off the charts. I had no idea what was wrong with me back then. So like, they would definitely think I was a witch. Also, because it is like a witch case, I want to channel witchy vibes. So I'm thinking like purple, black. I'm wanting to channel a bit of like Sarah Sanderson from Hocus Pocus. But no, really, I'm going to do like my own spin in it. But I do have a wig, right, that we might put on at the end of the video. I think in this case, let's start off with the fundamentals. Let's work our way from the ground up. What were the Salem Witch Trials? The Salem Witch Trials, they were a series of hearings and prosecutions that took place throughout colonial Massachusetts in February of 1692 and May of 1693. And the reason for these hearings and prosecutions was the fact that people were being accused of witchcraft, of being witches, and they didn't have a type. Like, you could be a man accused of being a wizard, or a woman accused of a witch, or a child being accused of being a wizard and a witch. Over 200 people would be accused of being a wizard or being a witch, 30 of which would be found guilty, and 20 of them would be executed. 14 of which would be female and 5 were male, and then there is a 6th male as well who we're going to get into a bit, because his winded up being a bit different. They don't class it as him being executed, but he was executed. And this man of the hour, the man in question, was Giles Corey. Now, he was actually an 80-year-old farmer, right? An 80-year-old farmer. And he was accused of being a wizard, but ultimately he was like, I'm not standing trial for wizardry, like, get a grip, I'm not going. Now, because he refused to go to court and enter a plea, they were like, well, you know what, if you're not going to come to the execution, we'll bring the execution to you. They would execute him using a very old torture method from like medieval times, and this method was pressing. So to be pressed was when they would lie like really heavy stones and rocks on you. They would add these rocks or stones one by one. They are incredibly heavy, and they would just keep piling them up until they ultimately crushed you and you were unable to breathe. resulting in your death. Which honestly just sounds so horrific, because there is no way that you would die right away from that. Like, that's going to take a while. Honestly, I think I would have rather walked up to the gallows. Now, there were actually another 5 people awaiting their trial in the jails, but they would wind up passing away from diseases that they caught in the jails. I'm not sure what diseases. I didn't really want to look into that, and I'm not going to judge, because you never know. The arrests for wizardry and witchcraft, they would be made beyond Salem Village, today known as Danvers. Specifically, this would be Andover and Topsfield. Now, both grand juries and the trials, they would be held in Salem town, and ultimately this is where they would also be executed via hanging. And listen, this place was nowhere that you should play games, because no one was safe. Even dogs, right, I'm sorry, but dogs could also be executed due to their alleged involvement in witchcraft. And there's actually 2 separate recordings of dogs being executed because they were apparently the witch's familiar. And of course, gender did have some involvement in identifying the accused, but misogyny can't really be blamed for the Salem Witch Trials, because there was also men being executed as well and believed to be wizards, so that puts that theory out the window. And the witch hunt that took place throughout the Salem Witch Trials, that would be the biggest and deadliest witch hunt throughout the history of colonial North America. Now, I'm going to do both you and me a favour here, because who knows, like, witch trials, they could come back, who's to say? So I'm going to tell you the signs and symptoms of what people would expect from a witch, or someone who's been bewitched, or a wizard and someone who's been bewizarded. Let's just ignore that, because I don't want us getting executed, so like, low-key, I'm going to give you the inside scoop. So one of the main factors of how they would identify whether or not you were a witch or a wizard was if you were female, starting off strong. So if you were female, you were believed to be one of the devil's hellbrides. Hellbride, that's what we all are. And it was said that females, they were more susceptible to sinning than men were. And of course, sinning, this was an indication of devil worship. So, you know, if you done a wee tiny sin, like the tiniest sin, you're worshipping the devil, you're his hellbride, up you go to the gallows. Also, if you were homeless or financially struggling, it was likely that you were a witch, which, get it? But honestly, that doesn't make sense to me, because like, if I was a witch, the last thing I would be is homeless. I'd be like magicking money and stuff to myself, or, you know, killing people and taking their money. Like, I would not be on the streets if I was a witch. Now, I've got to be honest here, quite clearly, someone was out to get us, because if you were homeless and financially unstable, you were a witch. But if you were too rich, you were also a witch. Like, if you presented as an unsupported, strong, independent, financially stable woman, you were a witch. Because how could you not have a male supporting you? Like, they say misogyny doesn't play a role in this, but if I'm absolutely honest, maybe a wee bit. The next identifier for being a witch was if you had more than one woman friend. I'd be safe, and I know pals, but if you had more than one woman friend and yous were out and there wasn't a male present, this was deemed to be a coven meeting where yous were getting together and worshipping the devil. I'd be safe, but I'm concerned for a lot of you out there. And if you happen to have an argument with one of these said woman friends, that was seen as you trying to deter focus from yourself and make them out to be a bad person, so people might suspect them as being a witch, when really you're just deterring from your witchy self. And you know, just to make sure they were really covering all bases, identifier number 6 was if you were seen arguing with anyone. So not just your friends now, like anyone. You can't argue with anyone. That's a real witchy issue. It was said that the reason that this was an identifier is because at this point, anyone could accuse anyone, male, female, child, adult, granny, toddler. No one was safe. We could all be accused. So therefore, if you're arguing with anyone, even your husband, you're deterring the focus. As a teenager, this would not go well for me. I could have started an argument in an empty room or argued with a brick wall. So, you know, meet you at the gallows. Identifier number 7. If you're old. Ageist much. If you were old, and even if you were married or unmarried, you were sus of being a witch. If you're very old, all eyes are on you. And like, I have to be honest, identifier number 8 just made me LOL, because if you're young, if you're young, you could also be a witch. That's a witchy sign. There's actually reports of a 4-year-old by the name of Dorothy Good being accused of being a witch, and she was held in jail for 9 months. Right, this 4-year-old, a toddler, 9 months in jail. Luckily for her, she turned on her mum and she said that her mum was a witch and her mum got executed and she would be freed 9 months later. But like, come on. Identifier number 9. If you were a healer, or what we know now as a nurse or doctor, you were either a witch or a wizard. And especially, you would be especially sus if you told people that they had to take their prescribed medications or they would get ill again. That was believed that you were using your power to make them ill if they didn't abide by your rules. Married with few or no children. Hashtag witch. So it was believed that if you didn't have any children, or if you only had like 1 or 2, it was said that your womb had been cursed by the devil himself. And if neighbours around you, if they had many children who, you know, would randomly like get a cold or a flu, it was thought that you, the childless, jealous, bitter woman, would put a hex on their house. Identifier number 11. If your neighbours were having trouble conceiving, you are a witch. How does this work? Like, it all kind of ties into each other, because what if I was the one with few or no children and I was having trouble conceiving? It's like a double-edged sword. Like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. You just can't win, because either way, you're a witch. But it's said if your neighbours were having trouble conceiving, then you were stealing their would-be babies. And if I haven't already met some of the criteria, I certainly would on this one. Identifier number 12. You exhibit stubborn, forward, or strange behaviour. If you hit out a little bit of sass, a little insult here and there, you're a witch. Like, any back chat, a small snide comment, that's my life, that is how I roll. So I might as well just walk myself up to the gallows and hang myself, because that's me. Identifier number 13, and this is a really important one. If you had any birthmarks, moles, third nipples, those were seen as devil marks, and that indicated to people that your pets, like your witchy pets, either a dog, cat or snake, they were latching to that area and drinking your blood. Like, I've got a wee funny birthmark here. Is that where my snake would drink from? Weird. Number 14, have you ever had butter or milk go bad in your fridge? Because if you've let dairy go bad, that's another sign that you're a witch. Oh, and also, if there's any cows nearby your home and they're not producing milk or producing very little milk, that's also on you. Number 15, sex out of wedlock. You guessed it, burn the witch. Number 16, did you daydream about a future husband, imagining what he might be like? You're trying to create him and therefore you're a witch. Number 17, did you break any rule in the Bible? If you did, then you and Satan had a pact. Bearing in mind at this point, Puritans, they observed Sabbath, which meant they couldn't kindle fire, no trading, no travelling, no adultery, they couldn't lead other people to God, they couldn't lie, be gluttonous, be idle, miss church, or even have long hair. Witch. I'm not being funny, but this video would be a really good drinking game for anyone who likes to play them. Just take a drink every time I say witch. You'll be absolutely steaming before we're even halfway through. Now, for over 300 years, the cause of the Salem Witch Trials has been a hot topic, a hot debate. Everyone wants to know what caused it. Some believe it was hallucinogenic fungus. Others believe it was teenage angst. Some people even believe it was just straight up boredom. So what really caused this paranoia and persecution throughout Salem? Well, we are going to discuss some of the most popular tales and theories of why the Salem Witch Trials might have happened. And we will, of course, be discussing those innocent people who lost their lives because they were accused of being a witch, because they opened their mouth and said something snarky. So it's 1692 and 12-year-old Abigail Williams, she is living with her uncle Samuel Parris. Now, in the household is Samuel Parris's children, and this includes his daughter, Betty, also known as Elizabeth, and they all lived in Salem Village of Massachusetts. It was January time when Abigail and Betty, they start having these really bizarre fits, and these fits had concerned Samuel Parris so much that he even requested a visit from Reverend Deodat Lawson. So Deodat, he had previously been the minister of Salem Village, and he would record what he observed when he entered the Parris home, and he said upon his arrival, Abigail, she started having what he referred to as a grievous fit. Sounds serious, right? I got scared. What's wrong with Abigail? Now, this really concerning grievous fit that Abigail was having, I'm not sure was even classified as a fit at all, never mind a grievous one. Because Abigail, she was running round the room, right? Rushing around really quick. She was in a rushed manner, which concerned him. And believe it or not, when she was running around, she had her hands up like this, stretched as far as they would go, as if she was about to fly. Witch. She's a witch. Now he's sitting there like, oh my god, this little girl thinks that she's going to be able to fly away. And not only that, when she was putting her arms up, she was going whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Now she's really trying to fly away. Deodat at this point, he's like, it's giving witchcraft. Now listen, admittedly, there was a wee bit of like strange behaviour when it came to Abigail. She was saying that she could see spirits and, you know, she would cry out in pain when she wasn't even in pain, and occasionally she would bark like a dog, but how do we know that she's not just playing animals? Can we really judge her that much? Honestly, let's really think about it. She's a 12-year-old girl who, when she's acting up, she's getting all of this attention from like people outside, people in the home. She could just be continuing to attention seek because she's getting a lot of attention, or she could have some sort of mental disorder or illness that's causing her to act in this way, or just general behavioural issues. Doesn't always have to be that deep. Now, it gets very concerning when close friends of Abigail and Betty, Ann Putnam and Elizabeth Hubbard, they start to display the same symptoms. And it's like the witchcraft is spreading. Or, stay with me here, or it's just two friends copying their other two friends. Just saying. But they all started complaining of like pinching and bites that no one else could see forming on their body, but they were saying that they could feel these sensations like someone was doing it to them. And they all had also described illusions and, you know, hallucinations and visions, which, yeah, doesn't sound great, but I'm still not convinced that it's witchcraft. So a doctor was then brought in to examine the girls and see what's up. Can he back up Reverend Deodat with the witchy allegations? The doctor comes in and he's examining all four of these girls, and he decides that medically there's nothing wrong with them. They're all in good health, fighting fit, great. But he concluded that their symptoms were a result of witchcraft. And so it begins. Now, Deodat and the doctor, they go ahead and they tell this 12-year-old girl who, you know, has a very imaginative mind, that she is in fact possessed by a witch. So she's been bewitched. And this little girl, she's terrified. She's like, oh my god, I'm under possession of a witch. And she would actually go on to be one of the main accusers during these trials. And it was said that she was at 8 trials acting as an accuser. I think they're just feeding into a fantasy here. Can she really accuse 8 people? So now, Abigail and Betty, their accusations of witchcraft, they're spreading like wildfire through the town of Salem. And not only that, they were also spreading through the neighbouring villages, like, oh my god, there is witches here, look out for the witches, here's how you spot a witch, if they do anything wrong or do anything right, they're a witch. But Salem and the neighbouring villages, they were desperate to find out who had put witchcraft upon 2 young girls. Who was this monster? We need to bring them to justice. So the witch hunt is underway, right? And Abigail, she is desperate to find out who possessed her. So she's thrown out accusations like jelly beans, right? Just handing them out to everyone. You're accused, you're accused, you're accused. Anyone that she could blame, she was blaming. And honestly, I kind of feel like she was trying to blame this possession, witchcraft on anyone that she possibly could, because she was worried that if she couldn't find someone to blame, then she would be accused of being the witch. So they're trying to figure out who is the cause of, you know, this witchcraft. And a neighbour comes forward and tells the family, and also tells the doctor, that there is one surefire way to identify a witch. This would be to make a special cake that was known as a witch cake. Now, this witch cake, it would be made up of the urine of the victim, the one who was bewitched. Their urine mixed with rye meal and also ashes. So if you bake up this witch cake, you know, make it all nice, once it is fresh out the oven, you can give this to special dogs that they referred to as familiars, and these dogs, they would tell you who the witches were. Now, of course, familiars were said to be helpers of witches and wizards, so it was believed that if you fed this dog the witch cake, it would put them under a spell and they would reveal the name of the guilty party. Now, the Reverend, he hears about this urine-filled witchy cake and he is not happy. He condemns this as going to the devil for help against the devil. And the neighbour who suggested this, trying to be a big help, although low-key thinks she was setting them up, but that neighbour would be punished by the church for giving out this advice because that was seen as almost, you know, working with the devil. Maybe she was accused of being a witch. Would make sense. On February 26th of 1692, Abigail, as soon as this first cake was made and consumed by the dog, she would accuse 3 separate young girls / women in their 20s of being the witches. And this was Tituba, Sarah Goodman, and also Sharon Osbourne. Did I actually just say Sharon Osbourne? Oh my god. Sarah Osbourne, no Sharon Osbourne. I said that with so much chest. Sharon Osbourne. So all 3 of these girls, no Sharon Osbourne, they would be arrested just a couple of days later on February the 29th of 1692. So Tituba, she was actually a slave of the Paris family. She came into the country, it said that she came in from Venezuela and then she was sold into slavery and then bought by the Paris family. And it is stated that she was said to be either in her late teens or early 20s at the time of her being accused of being a witch. Now, Tituba, she had been accused of voodoo, and apparently she had baked a cake, and with this cake that she was baking, it showed the fatal future of the Paris girls in the egg yolks. Now, the other girl who was accused, or should I say woman, Sarah Good, she was mentally ill, she really struggled, she lived in poverty, she didn't really have much to offer. And to be honest, she was a very easy target for the people of Salem to deem her a witch because sometimes she would act a bit strangely due to her mental illness. And now Sarah Osbourne, she was elderly and she was a widow. I believe she was like really quite elderly actually, like, you know, nearing the 100. And she would often argue with the Paris family. Funny that, but you know what they say, if you're arguing with people, you're trying to deter because you're the witch. To me, it just kind of seems like the Paris family are setting people up that they don't particularly like. That's just my opinion. So, March the 1st of 1692, Tituba and the other women, they appear in court to, you know, answer for their charges of witchcraft. Now, both of the Sarahs, they just outright denied any involvement in witchcraft. They said they had no idea about witchcraft, they've never dabbled in it, they have no idea why they're being accused, they don't understand. Whereas Tituba came into the court with a different plan of action, and weirdly enough, a plan that would work in her favour. So in court, Tituba says, "The devil came to me and bid me serve him." So she's admitting, like, that, you know, the devil did come to her and asked her to act on his behalf. Tituba, she even goes as far to give this really detailed and kind of horrifying account of her brush with the devil. She said that he was a tall man with white hair in a big coat. This tall man in a dark coat with a white hair that was tall, he was ordering her to harm children. And if she wouldn't harm the children, then he would kill her. And Tituba, she said that this man that came to her had a ton of different familiars. So he had a big dog, he also had a hog, a black cat, a red cat, a yellow bird, and an unknown hairy creature that walked on 2 legs. And like, great that she can, you know, give that account, but low-key it's giving someone who went to the pet shop for the first time and just memorised the pets around her. And listen, Tituba, she's not loyal, you know, she easily grasses in her fellow accused, her fellow accusees, I don't know, but she grasses them in, and she would tell even more horror stories about this brush with the devil and how she communicates with him, how he appears to her and stuff like that. And her descriptions and stories are so detailed and so horrifying to the people of Salem. They start to believe her, and they actually want to work with her to get the names of more witches. So Tituba, she tells the judge that she's not yet seen the Devil's Book of Names of the people he chose to do his bidding, but he did tell her, you can't see it this time, Tituba, but next time I'll show you the book. So she claimed that she didn't have names of anyone else, but she knew that there was witches in Boston and also in the nearby towns. So it's like she's given a lot of detail about the man that she's seen and her dealings with the man, but she's not very forthcoming with other names, which is good because, you know, the witches weren't real. And like, I mean, that's nice of her not to grass anyone else in, but she also just grassed in the two Sarahs quite easily, without hesitation. Now, Tituba, she was a smart lady, let me tell you, because after her retelling of her experience with the devil, she was deemed to be too valuable to kill, because like, what if the devil did come to her and give her more names of the witches? They need her. So because she was so valuable, she was just sentenced to prison, but she would eventually get out, and when she did, she would leave Salem for good with her husband, never to return. She still had to do time in prison, but at the end of the day, she was still alive. Whilst Tituba gets to, you know, sail off into the sunset with her husband, she has just grassed in Sarah and Sarah, so what's going to happen to them? She gets away with her life, but these two women are left behind to face consequences of actions they did not commit. So Sarah Good, she was known to be a social nuisance. As I've said, she was homeless and her family were also homeless as well. And they would do a lot of begging in the streets. You know, they're appealing to charity. They're appealing to people to help them. But begging in the streets, this was really frowned upon. And Sarah Good, she would actually curse out anyone who wouldn't give to charity. And people are just like, do you know what, I'm so sick of passing this woman on the street and she's always got her hand out, like expecting us to reach in our pockets and give her dimes. Dimes, motherfucking dimes! So when these young girls start having fits and hallucinations and all this crazy behaviour going on, all fingers point to Sarah Good. And a doctor even claimed that she was under an evil hand. And what's even worse is when Sarah Good, when she went to trial, her husband even implied that he also believed she was a witch. He's like, burn her at the stake. His own wife, right? Something's not right there. I don't know if maybe he was worried that he might start getting looked at if he tries to like stick up for her or believe her. He was game for her to be executed. And of course, if someone's own husband can go against him this way, this only solidified for the people of Salem that Sarah Good must in fact be a witch. Otherwise, why would her husband accuse her? Now, another reason that she was deemed to be a witch was because she was a social outcast. Bearing in mind, the people of Salem are the ones who are outcasting her. That's why she's a social outcast. They've caused that, no Sarah. She also didn't attend church. She couldn't recite any psalms. And when the minister had told her to confess, she screamed at him. She said, "You are a liar. I am no more a witch than you are a wizard. If you take my life away, God will give you blood to drink." Now, despite her spitting bars at her trial, Sarah Good, she would be found guilty on July the 19th of 1692, and she and 4 other accused Salem witches, they would all be hanged. Well, Sarah Good was, you know, one of the earliest stories that we've got regarding the hangings of the Salem witches. She wasn't actually the first. So before Sarah Good, there was Bridget Bishop. Now, Bridget Bishop, she was suspected long before the Salem Witch Trials had even started. Her husband was the one who was basically implying her of being a witch. He said that she was a really bad wife. She sat up all night with the devil. And like, her case wouldn't really be helped when her husband died, and her own children said that she bewitched them to death in 1679. Now, luckily for Bridget, she was able to evade arrest. But in 1692, that would all change, because the afflicted girls, they had known about Bridget Bishop, and who easier to blame than a woman who was already thought of as being a witch? And of course, she would be arrested. So when Bridget Bishop goes to the court to defend herself, the afflicted girls, right, she walks in, they all start kicking off. They start having these wild fits that everyone's like, oh my god, look, she must be the witch because they're all having fits in the court. They were honestly just doing the most, right? But as well as that, her neighbours testified against her, saying that she had set her spectre, like a ghostly apparition, on them to torment them. She sent the ghost to their house to torment them. And apparently she would use voodoo dolls to try and hurt them, and she was also making their household items disappear. How do you know it's Bridget though? Like, if she's sending a wee ghostly apparition to you, it's not going to be Bridget. Now, I have to say, I think the nail in Bridget Bishop's coffin was when they did a physical examination of her and they found a birthmark, which they didn't even call a birthmark. They were like, there's her devil mark. There it is, right there. That was her. Her fate was sealed at that point, and she would swiftly be found guilty, and then of course she would be executed. So on June the 10th, 1692, Bridget Bishop, she would be executed via hanging. And at this point, even reverends, they weren't safe. So on August the 19th of 1692, Reverend George Burroughs, he would be brought to his execution. Now, the reason that he was brought to execution was he had made a lot of enemies in Salem. Apparently, he had ran up quite a lot of debt when he was trying to pay for his wife's funeral, and then he just took off. So he wasn't really a well-liked character. And when he did eventually return to Salem, the afflicted girls, they started accusing him of bewitchment. Apparently, they had done this to him. But like, how many bewitchers can you have? Like, can it be multiple? Now, unfortunately for George, when he got to court, he did himself no favours. Like, no favours at all. He was telling the court that his house isn't haunted, but his house has toads. Toads are known to be a pet of a witch or a wizard. So, you know, they're kind of thinking like, you've got toads because you're a wizard, yeah. Now, not only that, but it also went against him the fact that he only had one child baptised and he could not remember the last communion that he had taken. So, before George was executed, he starts reciting the Lord's Prayer, which this is a telltale sign that someone is not a witch or a wizard, because apparently witches and wizards, they could not recite the Lord's Prayer. They couldn't do it. They wouldn't be allowed to do it. So George does this and everyone in the audience is like low-key shook. Like, hold up, we might have the wrong man. I'm just saying. But the judge, he doesn't want to be wrong, and he's like, nah. Even the devil has transformed himself into an angel of the light. We're not falling for it. Hang him. But then it's like, you're totally going against the rules then. Like, what are people meant to expect? His Lord's Prayer should have saved him, and it never. And then a woman by the name of Martha Carrier, she would be executed on the same day as George. Now, the reason that she would be executed was because she brought smallpox into the town, and they believe that this is an act of complete wickedness and that she did it deliberately. They believe that Martha Carrier was at home like because she had brought in the smallpox, when really she was at home suffering because she also had the smallpox. Now, another popular theory that people talk about is the fact that the people of Salem might have had PTSD from the Native American War. One of the brutal conflicts known as King Philip's War, that raged in the colonies through 1670, and the front lines of the battle were not that far from Salem. Now, some of these girls who were apparently afflicted by these witches, they had actually witnessed raids happening well before they were making the claims that, you know, they were bewitched, and long before they were displaying any symptoms of bewitchment. Now, it was believed that these afflicted girls were afflicted, but not by witches, by PTSD, which was bringing on high stress, high anxiety, that was basically causing them to have these visions and hallucinations. Now, another theory that is very highly believed by people is that boredom was the cause of the Salem Witch Trials. Apparently, these children during the Puritan times, they had nothing to do. Like, they were only allowed to study the Bible and do their chores. Like, they had no time to have fun. So some of them would dabble in fortune-telling games, which ultimately terrified them. Now, because these fortune-telling games were the only thing they really had to do outside of studying the Bible and doing their chores, they became so invested in it, and they were really drawn to these superstitions, and it got to a point where that was all they were thinking about. Could this have caused them to have the hallucinations and visions that they were having? Because it was really the only thing they were giving all of their attention to. And so some people believe that their involvement in these forbidden games, and also the combination of guilt and fear that they felt because they had participated in them, this might have been the real cause of their strange behaviour. Now, another commonly believed theory is that of teen angst and patriarchal oppression. And the fact that their accusations and their afflictions had been so prominent so early on in their life, they do believe that simple teen angst could have been something that led to the start of the Salem Witch Trials. Now, there's many others that believe that the reason the Salem Witch Trials had started was due to teenage rebellion. Like, they wanted to rebel against the Puritan authority, which was, the older generation. And, even though some of these women were only in their 20s when they were being accused, there was a lot older women as well who were being accused. And therefore, they wanted to rebel against them, like, oh, what, you're mean to me? Oh, what, I can't play games, I need to study the Bible and do my chores all day. I'm going to accuse you of being a witch. And there it goes. Stemmed from there. Seems legit. Now, I'll be honest, this theory is one that I was struggling to get on board with at first, but things align and it kind of makes sense. So some people believe that the cold weather that happened before the Salem Witch Trials and then during could actually have been the cause. Now, the most active era of witchcraft in Europe and then also across America coincided with a 400-year period of lower than average temperatures. Now, due to the low temperatures at this time, crops would be dying, fish wouldn't be migrating as far north, which eliminates a primary food source for people. People were hungry, potentially malnourished, which of course, as we know, can cause aggravated behaviour, can cause people to not think straight, can cause them to act in very strange ways. And it was said that the year 1692 fell bang in the middle of a 50-year-long cold period. And this was from 1680 until 1730. And the reason that the cold weather was brought into it is because people believed that witches, they could control the weather and they could also destroy crops. So when bad weather came, they were like, the witches are out. A crop dies, or you planted your potatoes wrong and they don't grow. That was a witch. Now, probably the most prominent and favourable theory regarding the Salem Witch Trials was that it was caused by mass hysteria. Now, mass hysteria existed not just during the Salem Witch Trials, but also before. And if you're not aware, mass hysteria is designed as a rapid spread of conversion disorder. Now, this is a functional disorder which can cause very abnormal sensory experiences, and it can even cause movement problems during periods of very intense psychological stress. So, the weird movements and stuff of the girls' bodies, things that they were doing, could be due to this conversion disorder. Now, many people believed that this is what was happening to the girls who were first afflicted, the girls who were first bewitched. But it was said that this might have happened due to such strict and religious circumstances that they were living in, and also the dangerous frontier. This might have caused the girls to convert their psychological stress into physical symptoms. And honestly, if only we could convert stress into money, because my God, I would be a rich woman. I would be so wealthy. Stress into money, whoop, that would be my jam. So this hysteria that was being experienced by these girls, this might have triggered a collective delusion throughout the villagers. They might have believed that witches were in their midst. And if everyone was feeling the exact same way, if everyone was anxious, if everyone was terrified, that could certainly start a witch hunt. Now, was it the mass hysteria, or was it the suspicious fungi? Not the fungi from your party, but the hallucinogenic fungus known as ergot. Now, just to confirm, this is not a hallucinogenic that you can purchase in Amsterdam and consume before your minds go there. And honestly, at first, this sounded very far-fetched to me, but the more I read about it, I was like, maybe. It's possible. So ergot could actually be found in rye and wheat, if the weather conditions would allow it. And believe it or not, the conditions during this period of time was perfect for ergot. The rye and the wheat that they are eating on a daily basis could absolutely have had ergot attached to it, which would then cause the hallucinations because it is a hallucinogenic fungus. And that's the thing to remember, this stuff would be getting consumed daily. This was one of their primary food sources. I'm sure they would be consuming enough that it might cause hallucinations. But the question that I had was, could this hallucinogenic cause every person in the village to have the same bad trip? Maybe? I don't know. Now, the bit that really sold this to me is that this fungus, this is known to cause hallucinations, convulsions, pinching sensations, which, bearing in mind this is exactly what the girls had said, they were experiencing pinching sensations as well as biting sensations. Sad enough. And to be fair, this ergot stuff, that can actually be used to make LSD. So like, I mean, maybe you could purchase it in Amsterdam, but I don't know if they sell LSD. Like, I don't really know much about this stuff, right? But maybe. But yeah, I mean, that could possibly be a reason why people felt like they were bewitched in Salem. Now, it's strange because as quickly as the Salem Witch Trials arrived, they were gone. By 1711, the colony of Massachusetts, they had restored the good names of the people that they had executed and accused of being witches. Now, whilst that's great and, you know, really nice that they restored their good names, Salem never actually apologised for accusing them in the first place and also executing them. And it wouldn't be until 1957 when the state would apologise. Centuries later. Too little too late. Now obviously today, the accused Salem witches and wizards, they're actually thought of as being victims to one of the most bizarre periods in American history. They were faced with mass hysteria, vengeful neighbours, court accepting evidence like spectres, ghostly apparitions. They did not stand a chance. If you were accused, most likely you were going to be found guilty, and even more likely, you were going to be executed. And what a lot of people find particularly unsettling about the Salem Witch Trials is if it happened so quickly back then, what's to say that it couldn't happen now? Let's just think about that. But that is it for another true crime and makeup episode, more specifically a homicidal history episode. I really hope you enjoyed this one. I was so excited to do it. I am obsessed with anything Salem, the witch trials. There was also witch trials in Scotland that I could cover as well if you would like me to. But I was like, do you know what? This is true crime. I can get away with doing this as a true crime episode. And I felt like for my first video in October, it was only right that I did something Halloween themed. And I will be adding the names of all of the executed victims on screen. Obviously I won't have their photo. I just thought having their names there and paying that bit of respect to them, because whilst this is such a bizarre case, this did happen to real people and you almost forget that because it is so bloody crazy. But truly, this happened to real people. Real people were accused and executed. If you did enjoy this one though, let me know what you would like to see next from me. It can be something Halloween themed if you would like. I am going to be doing some spooky content throughout October, which I really hope you enjoy because this is my favourite time of the year, and to talk about anything paranormal and true crime, it's pretty amazing. Before you go though, please don't forget to subscribe, put the notification bell on so you don't miss when I upload. Make sure you leave a comment down below so YouTube knows that you're enjoying my videos, engaging with them, and that'll help boost the algorithm. If you're interested in anything that I've used on my face today, all the product details will be linked down below for you. In the description you will also find my social media handles, so my Instagram and my TikTok. Give me a follow there because I will be posting on there more moving forward. There is also a link for my Google Doc down below where you can send in your case suggestions. My email will still be there, but people are having trouble reaching me via email, so if that's you, please submit it on the Google Doc so I can make sure I get back to you. But that's it for today. Please remember, be a good person, don't be a bad person, stay safe, look after each other, and I will see you in the next one. Bye! Thank you.